My screen?
Yes, and we hear you fine. That's good. Yep.
All right, perfect. So let's see. All right. So thank you so much to the Canadian Celiac Association for having me. I love doing this conference, and I hope you guys learned something today. I'm going to be speaking about the gluten-free diet and plant-based diets, which I don't know, I feel like this is a trending topic right now, particularly we're seeing it in Canada. So I'm going to cover what a plant-based diet means in the gluten-free context, what the health benefits of eating plant-based are, what nutrients might be lacking in a plant-based gluten-free diet, and then what are the recommendations to meet your nutrient needs if you're going to follow this type of diet. So there's actually a lot of different types of plant-based diets. This isn't really a consistent thing. So, you might hear vegan, you might hear vegetarian, there's different types of vegetarian, all of them are different forms of the plant-based diet. There's also non-vegetarian diets that can be pretty plant-based. So, vegan, you exclude all animal products. Then there's the various types of vegetarian with lacto-vegetarian, meaning you exclude everything except for dairy. Ovo-vegetarian, when you exclude everything except for eggs. Lacto-ovo-vegetarian, you exclude meat, fish, and poultry, but you include dairy and eggs. And then pescatarian means you don't eat meat and poultry, or eggs and dairy, but you include fish. So there's a lot of types. You'll hear different reasons why people follow these various ones, but these are kind of the definitions. Then there's the plant-based, which is what I'm going to be primarily covering. So this is a primary plant-based diet, but includes animal products in small amounts or infrequently. And then there's the gluten-free diet, which I know most of you are very familiar with here, but it's a diet that excludes wheat, barley, and rye. So these are plants. And so how does one follow a plant-based gluten-free diet? We're going to get into that. So some of the health benefits of eating plant-based diets, I think, are really becoming more well known, but also maybe a little bit exploited. So while the plant-based diet is rich in fiber, high in vitamins and minerals, that's shown to reduce risk for chronic disease like low blood pressure, lowering cholesterol, lowering risk for diabetes. It's also really, I think what's exciting is we're studying the gut a little bit more. So it's also been linked to improving the gut microbiome because of the high fiber nature of the diet. And also having such a variety of plants gives a lot of diversity to the microbiome. So that's really exciting new research that I think people are hearing a lot about. There's also the environmental benefits. So having plant-based proteins generally uses less water and land than feeding an animal. And so this can produce fewer carbon emissions than animal proteins. It's also lower cost. I think this is a misconception that a plant-based diet is very expensive. You can have very low cost options on a plant-based diet, but they've got to be smart choices. I think it can be a little bit tough to get enough of the nutrients you need while following this type of diet and making sure that you're being cost effective, but I can kind of get into that a little bit if people have questions about it. And then of course, animal humanity. I think a lot of times people kind of start on this journey out of care for animals, and that's great. And that's a wonderful reason to do it. But it's not the only way to have an ethical diet, if you will. I mean, there's always buying from small local farmers and that type of thing where they're treating the animals more humanely. So there's ways to kind of integrate the principles of these things into a diet that includes animal proteins, but it's not totally necessary. So when we look at the plant-based gluten-free landscape, I mean, there are a lot of options. So there's the traditional protein alternatives, and I will say you've got to be kind of careful with these, right? A lot of them have mixes of different things that, they're not necessarily gluten-free, whereas, a piece of chicken is gluten-free or a piece of steak is gluten-free. You have to be a little bit careful with some of these products. So of course, always read labels. There's a lot of new options out there. I think it's kind of exciting. You also from a nutrition perspective want to be aware that there are a lot of additives in some of these things. Sometimes they have a lot of sugar and salt and other additives to make them taste good and give them the texture they want. So you've got to be really careful. I think it's exciting that we're getting a lot more of these things, but just you always have to be careful and check labels. But primarily they're going to be soy-based, nut-based, bean-based, sometimes seed, sometimes grain, but this is generally what we're talking about when it comes to products. What's interesting is that the protein, just because you're following a plant-based diet, you still have the same nutrition guidelines in terms of macronutrients that a person who's not following a plant-based diet does. And for vegans, you might need to take in more protein to actually meet your needs. There's this thing called bioavailability, and plant proteins do not have as much bioavailable protein as animal proteins. And so it's estimated that vegans need up to 10% more protein to compensate for that lack of bioavailable proteins. But so generally speaking, you want about half your daily intake to be coming from carbohydrates. We have it at 45 to 65%. That's pretty much a global recommendation. Protein, 10 to 35% of your daily calorie intake. And I know that seems like a big range, but it's actually just a few grams difference in that range when you come down to it. And if you wanted to calculate your own protein needs, generally speaking, 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. So if you wanted to figure out your own needs, you could do that. And then I have here a picture of some of the different grams in a serving of classic plant-based proteins. And then fat is kind of something I think a lot of people forget about, but you need fat in your diet, healthy fats, good sources, things like avocado or olive oil or nuts and seeds. These are all really good sources of fat that are important to include for satiety, and also just making your meals, satiety, and then making your meals more balanced. So, when you talk about a plant-based diet, you always have to talk about what you might be lacking. Anytime you cut out something from your diet, you've got to try to make up for those nutrients in another way. So, the gluten-free diet is limited in certain nutrients, and so is the plant-based diet. So you've got to kind of understand the overlap, I think, before choosing to follow a diet like this. So vegan diets, we're talking vegan, so this is a little different than plant-based, but they are lower in protein, lower in some vitamins and minerals, and some important ones, and I bolded them. So B2, B12, vitamin D, calcium, iodine, selenium, zinc. But they can be adequate in many other things. You're getting a lot more vitamins and minerals from plants very often than you are in animal products. So you just, it's trade-offs, right? And then vegan diets tend to be very high in fiber and high in antioxidants, which makes sense because they're very plant forward, assuming you're following a very plant forward vegan diet, which some people do not. Now, the gluten-free diet is lower in fiber and very often carbohydrates because of the elimination of wheat from the diet. It's also low in vitamin B2, B12, vitamin D, calcium, iodine, selenium, zinc. These are very important nutrients. So there's a lot of overlap here with the vegan diet and the gluten-free diet. So assuming you are on a gluten-free diet and you're interested in following a more plant-forward diet, it's important to think about how you're going to get these nutrients. In general, people kind of struggle to get appropriate amounts of vitamins and minerals in their diet. And I think once you kind of understand how to find them and get them through diet, and maybe a supplement is required, but the goal is to always get them from food first. If you can't meet your needs, you may need a supplement. That's based on blood work. Your doctor will tell you if they think you are deficient in a nutrient, and you should always listen to that instead of just going to take a supplement. So these are things to think about and how you're going to get them if you're going to embark on this plant-based journey. So I've listed here some protein-rich plant foods. Many of these are probably not a surprise, but I think, good refresher on how much protein you can get from these plant-based foods. Now, what's interesting is that if you calculate your protein needs and you kind of figure out the number of grams you need per day, and then you take a look at this chart, it might be a little bit harder to meet your needs. I also like to tell people that the body can't really digest huge amounts of protein at one time. It's better to spread your protein intake throughout the day in order to really absorb the protein well. So, while consuming 50 grams of protein in one meal might sound great, you're actually really not going to be able to use you're really only going to be able to use about half of that, which is not ideal. So, spreading protein intake throughout the day to absorb more of it is the goal. Talking about B12, I think people really have relied heavily on B12 supplements for energy in the last few years. I've seen that as a dietitian, and I do caution that this really, B12 deficiency is serious. You absolutely should take a supplement if your doctor recommends it. But I don't think every single person needs to be on a supplement. So I just want to upfront say, go on your blood work. Don't just take these things. You can get these numbers from your blood work. And if you're not deficient, no need to take additional B12. But it is an important nutrient for blood cell and DNA synthesis and nervous system function. And of course, energy is what everyone knows it for. So the recommendation is 2.4 micrograms per day. A lot of times this must come from fortified foods and supplements, especially in vegans and vegetarians. So it's not hard to get enough. It's not hard to get enough B12 in the diet when you're following when you can consume meat. It can be harder in a vegan or a vegetarian diet. So just be cautious here. In terms of fortification, not all foods are fortified. We know a lot of gluten-free foods are not fortified. So you're going to have to it's going to be kind of hit or miss if something is fortified. Sometimes cereals are, sometimes plant-based milks are fortified, sometimes meat alternatives are fortified. But, it's not necessarily true. I mean, Bob's Red Mill and Beyond Meat, they fortify their products, but you're going to find a lot that are not. So if you're following a vegan or vegetarian diet, definitely ask your doctor to check for deficiencies. Calcium is another big one, especially for people following a gluten-free diet. You've got to really be careful about bone health. We know calcium is very important for bone health. It's also important for muscle and nerve function. But it's not always that well absorbed from plant-based sources because there's something called oxalates in foods that kind of competes with the absorption of calcium. So very often people need to go on a calcium supplement, and that's okay. Again, your doctor will tell you if that's the case for you. In general, these are the recommendations for healthy adults. So roughly 1,000 milligrams per day for most people. It can be pretty hard to get this. I will say I've kind of done a diet recall on myself and to try to determine if I'm getting enough calcium. It can be pretty tough. And so, this 1,000 milligrams is a recommendation for daily intake. It might, if you're under sometimes and you're over sometimes, that's okay. Food sources, dairy really is a good source of calcium. And so it's, while not every single person can tolerate dairy, if you can, and you are, and you like it, I think it's a really good option because it's much, much harder to get your needs from other foods like tofu or leafy greens. Although those are all great sources and we should be consuming them, it is a little harder. So, just be aware of calcium. A lot of people need a calcium supplement. That's okay. But again, we don't want over supplementation. And then there's vitamin D, also really important for bone health. Vitamin D is one of those that I think sometimes people take too much. I actually know someone who was taking very, very large doses of vitamin D on a daily basis in order to prevent COVID. And I think that was kind of a misconception for a while. It can be toxic when consumed in high amounts. You really need to be careful. It can cause liver toxicity. So, appropriate amounts of vitamin D and supplementation can be great. I mean, it is hard to meet your vitamin D needs through food. Your body can make it when it's exposed to enough sunlight. We know in the winter that's a little harder to do, especially in the northern hemisphere. But ask your doctor how much you need in terms of supplementation if you're going to take one. Do not take large doses like 10,000 IUs daily. In adults, a 600 IU daily supplement is probably adequate. And I really, really recommend being careful when it comes to vitamin D supplementation, because it's a fat soluble vitamin. It stays in your body. So please ask your doctor which dose is right for you. There are some vegan sources of vitamin D. There's some fortified products. Mushrooms can have some vitamin D, but also, truthfully, the best way to get it is to just get outside and be exposed to the sunlight. We also have to talk about iron. So iron is very important. It transports oxygen and transports oxygen through your blood, and it supports energy levels and maintains immune and brain function. There are a lot of sources of iron. This is a list here, but I mean, if you're consuming a plant-based diet, it's a little bit harder to get iron naturally from the diet. So these are just some examples of plant-based sources that contain iron. They're not always the most bioavailable sources. Some things to help with your iron needs. You can add vitamin C or consume vitamin C with your iron-rich meals. I know this is not plant-based, but an example that I give a lot is consume red peppers with steak, because the vitamin C in the peppers can enhance the absorption of the iron in your steak. Now, I know we're talking plant-based here, so the same rules apply. Pretend you're having chickpeas, maybe have it with some peppers or some citrus. That could be a really nice complement. You want to separate your iron and calcium intake so that so that the absorption is not impaired. And sometimes the tannins in tea or coffee can prevent the absorption of iron, so just consume them separately as well. Iron can, I think iron deficiency anemia is very serious, and your doctor will often treat this with a supplement, but the supplements can be pretty tough on the digestive system. So for long-term use, I, as a dietitian, really don't recommend them. But, for treating deficiency, they may be necessary. So this also should be done under the guidance of a doctor. It's kind of my theme for the day. We also have omega-3 fatty acids. So omega-3 fatty acids are a type of polyunsaturated fat, and they're essential, which means, you need them, but your body cannot make them. And so there's different types, and the three most important are ALA, EPA, and DHA. ALA is mostly found in plants, while EPA and DHA are found in animal foods like fatty fish. ALA is actually the most common omega-3 fatty acid found in your diet, and it's in plant foods, and it can be turned into EPA and DHA. So you'll see the conversion rates here. This graphic was actually borrowed from another dietitian named Melanie Rogers, who has some great graphics if you want to check her out. But the absorption rates can be a little bit lower. So I'll actually show you more specifics here. So, I mean, in general, it is possible to get these things through diet. I will say vegan and vegetarian diets tend to have more rates of deficiency because they're not consuming a lot of the food sources that are very high in these things like fatty fish. So here are some sources. I really think a tablespoon of chia seeds or flax seeds daily is a good way to get some. That's what I personally practice. I'm not having fatty fish every single day, but the flax seeds, the chia seeds, hemp seeds can be really, really nice additions to a meal if you're looking to get some omega-3 fatty acids into your diet. And then, of course, if you consume fish, there's the fish options. And here are the recommendations, and you can look these up online. They're very easily accessible on government websites. So for fiber, fiber is, as a dietitian, my favorite nutrient. Very, very important nutrient. And when you are consuming a gluten-free diet, it's something to think about, because when you remove wheat, how are you going to get fiber? Fiber is found in all plant foods. So there is a lot of fiber in gluten-free whole grains, but there's also fiber in fruits, vegetables, beans, that type of thing. So soluble fiber is the type that turns your stools into like a gel, slows digestion, stabilizes blood sugar, very important for kind of softening the stool. And you can get it from things like beans and soft vegetables and lentils and peas. And then there's insoluble fiber, which is more of the roughage. This helps add bulk to your stool. And this is really more in your whole grain products, your nuts, seeds, popcorns, the skin of fruits and vegetables, that type of thing. So fiber is really important, and you need about 30 grams per day, but it's important not to do too much too soon. And I think this is why a lot of people, they miss this part, because it can be really hard to tolerate fiber if you haven't been for a while. So if you've been on a gluten-free diet and you're looking to add more plants into your diet, you might have unpleasant digestive symptoms. So add things slowly, small portions. Cooking the fruits and vegetables, or mostly vegetables in that case, or grains, they can be a little bit more easily tolerated. Doing nut butters instead of nuts at first. I would just say, gradual transitions so that you don't have unpleasant digestive symptoms. And then, over time, you can add more plants into your diet and, include more things that you really like, and then eventually kind of work your way up to the full plant-based lifestyle that you're trying to live. Too much too soon can be very uncomfortable. And so, with fiber, with plants, it's better to just kind of ease in. With a lot of products, as I mentioned before, I won't spend too much time on this slide in the interest of time, but gluten-free products, plant-based products, I should say, can have hidden sources of gluten. So I've listed some examples here, but in general, read your labels, because this is going to be sometimes very hidden and unclear in some of these products. It's important to be checking labels of these things. And then dining out. I think, how can you follow a healthy plant-based diet? Diversity is a really important thing. So going beyond tofu, everyone thinks, oh, vegetarians only eat tofu. That's not true. It doesn't have to be true. There's a lot of other good sources of plants, and you should be consuming a variety. There's also wonderful staple dishes of many cuisines. And this is like the biggest thing, is like fake meat is so optional. I don't think you need to consume fake meat products, and they actually have a lot of fat, sodium, and other additives very often. So, this is just some general advice. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this just to get through my last couple slides here, but canned fruits and vegetables, frozen fruits and vegetables, all of these things can be really nice options to stock your pantry with. And it's always important to read the labels, as I've been saying. And then I just want to end with kind of the psychological considerations. I think when you have celiac disease and you need to follow a gluten-free diet, there's a lot of other considerations. And so following a plant-based diet can it's this balance of, is this supporting my health, or is this making me a little bit too afraid of food? And so, liberalize your diet as much as you can. You don't need to give up all of your animal foods right away. I would say, have fun with this, make new recipes. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. You want to have a more plant forward diet. That's great, but it doesn't need to be all or nothing. If it's going to cause extra stress, that's probably not the most appropriate approach for you. And then, do you need to be a vegan? I would say no. A plant-based diet has health, environmental, and personal benefits, but there's a lot of factors that go into a diet. So if this is not feasible for you, that is okay. It's always good to increase your plants and reduce your intake of animal proteins, but it doesn't have to be all or nothing is really the key message here. And that is okay. So I'll just end with, we do have a number of vegan products from Schar. It's funny, our Canadian audience seems to really respond well to this. And so I just wanted to share it here. But again, I don't believe everyone needs to be a vegan. If you aren't interested, though, these are our vegan products in Canada. And all right.
Okay, thank you very much, Megan. Before we get to questions, I just want to give away a couple prizes donated by Dr. Schar. We're giving away two $50 prize packs with the new Schar baguettes and pizza crusts. And the winners of these prizes are Sarah Ving-Mazer from Bengo, Saskatchewan, and Kathleen Geiger from Ottawa, Ontario. So we actually only have about 3 minutes left for questions. I will mention tomorrow we're doing a whole